All right, it is 2 o'clock in Berlin. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Totally Glocally, Climate Change, Communication and Culture, Overcoming Resignation and Co-Creating the Future. My name is Clare Richardson. I'm going to be moderating this session today. I'm an American journalist and news anchor based here in Berlin, and I'm so glad you could all join us for this session. I myself am particularly fascinated to hear what the role of communication and culture is going to be, even if it is the news that's partly or largely responsible for these feelings of resignation that we'll be discussing. We have a fantastic lineup of participants from across sectors. So I think we really have a multidisciplinary approach to these issues. There are people dealing with everyday questions of communication and culture on climate change, and I'm really delighted to welcome them for this important conversation and to have all of you in the audience. I think we have a good number of people here already, some more still trickling in, but let's get started. I'd like to dive right in and begin with a formal welcome of Dr. Odile Triebe. She is the head of dialogue and research on culture and foreign policy at IFA. So thank you very much, Dr. Triebe, for organizing this important event. Looking forward to hearing your opening remarks, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Claire, for your nice introduction. Yeah, dear audience, welcome to the first panel discussion of the Totally Glocally web talks in 2022, organized by IFA with the support of Ecological Institute. IFA, the Institute for Foreign Cultural Relations, is Germany's oldest intermediary organization in the field of international cultural relations. We support artistic and civil society exchange worldwide and research on international cultural relations. Cultural relations in Germany are understood as one of the key pillars in the country's external relations. And as our Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock frequently and recently again stressed, that climate is the biggest security challenge of our time, we need to reflect on the role culture and cultural relations can play in building a better, safer, more equitable, and more peaceful future. This year, we will focus in our web talks on communication and decolonizations at some of the aspects in this field. The focus today. As the disastrous consequences of climate change become clearer each year, debates on what to do about it and about degrees of responsibility of countries, sectors, and individuals have become more and more heated. The enormity of the challenge to implementing the Paris Agreement goals in a relatively short time frame, the complexity of the topics as a whole, and the varying prospect of profound changes to people's lives make these discussions difficult. Together with a studied drumbeat of negative and often polarized news reports in the media and on the internet, this can quickly be overwhelming and lead to exhaustion, resignation, and apathy, with members of the public asking themselves, what can I do anyway? However, implementing the Paris goals will be very hard without broad societal support. We therefore need to consider first, how to counter or preempt these negative psychological reactions and the feeling of inevitability. And second, how to instead create positive and constructive narratives, a sense of solidarity and empowerment. In this, questions of communication and psychology play an important role. Given their long experience in other policy domains, civil society organizations, artists, and cultural actors are well placed to energize and mobilize people by fostering opportunities for engagement and participation. By translating data-heavy science and complex socioeconomic scenarios into tangible concepts, initiatives, and political demands, they can give ordinary people a voice and a sense of ownership. But what are some of the underlying phenomena of climate communication and challenges to achieving this? And how can individuals and cultural actors contribute? This is what we are going to discuss today with our distinguished panelists, and not only them. I'm looking forward also to an inspiring discussion with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Triebe, for setting us up with that insight to kick things off. As we've heard, we're dealing with some of the most pressing issues of our time, how we talk about climate change in a way that empowers people to take action. You know, we're surrounded by doom and gloom in the media, and it's easy to fall into this pattern of despair. So the question is, how do we get around these psychological reactions and instead actually foster a sense of responsibility and solidarity. And specifically, what is the unique role of the cultural sector? I'm talking about artists, civil society organizations, cultural actors in actually affecting this change. So this is how it's going to work for our discussion today. Each of our panelists is going to give brief opening remarks. We'll then move to a panel discussion and then open the floor to all of you in our audience for questions and comments. Before we get started, I do have to go over a couple of housekeeping rules. Please, unless you're speaking, keep your microphones off. This, I think we're all familiar with from the pandemic at this point. However, please feel free to keep your camera on. We'd love to see who's behind those names, see your beautiful faces if the internet connection allows. And as we move to the Q&A section, there will be the chance to raise your hand using the Zoom feature if you want to contribute. You'll also be able to put your questions in the chat. Questions or comments can go there as text. And if you choose to do it that way, just let us know who the question is for. You can put their name and then your question. You can also rename yourself if necessary, so that we have the correct identifier, your name, your institution. To do that, you can just right-click on your video and choose rename. And importantly, this event will be recorded, so you can watch it back on YouTube later. And if you're having any technical problems, you can reach out to Anna, who is here with us today, either by chat or give her a call on that number. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to welcome our panelists for today's discussion. We have Dr. Michael Shank, the Director of Engagement at the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. It's a group of international cities committed to achieving long-term carbon reduction goals. And he's also written for many prominent US news outlets and teaches graduate level courses on subjects including sustainable development, climate and security, and communicating conflict, which is going to come in very handy for today's conversation, I imagine. Also pleased to welcome Katharina van Bronswijk, a climate activist who can talk to us about the psychology of the climate crisis. She's a psychologist and psychotherapist who runs her own practice in Hamburg, just south of Hamburg, and she is a spokesperson on the managing board of Psychologists and Psychotherapists for Future Group. Welcome, Katharina. And last but not least, from the cultural sector, we have Ayat Najafi, a multimedia artist, film and theater director born in Tehran. He joins us there. He normally lives in Berlin, but he's actually joining us from Tehran, Iran today. His theater productions have had runs at multiple locations in Germany, Iran, and at international festivals. So he is going to be a welcome voice to this conversation as we go ahead. So welcome, everybody. I'm pleased you could join us and looking forward to hearing our panelists' remarks to kick us off. We'll speak first to Michael, then to Katharina, and then to Ayat in that order. So Michael, I would like to invite you to unmute yourself and kick us off. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Claire, for that introduction, and thanks to both institutes for hosting this conversation. I'm thrilled with the panel. What a wonderful, diverse input panel. So I'm excited to learn from the other panelists and be in conversation with all of you over chat, over video. So I do hope folks feel comfortable weighing in on chat too, and that's why I tried to seed the chat with some comments so folks engage there as well. So let me just share my screen and jump in. So I'm thrilled that we're taking this seriously because this whole idea of actorness, solidarity, and empowerment is pretty important right now for all the reasons that the previous speakers mentioned and for Claire's introduction, because it is overwhelming, it is anxiety producing. And our work today, our conversation today is really focused on how do we build this community that is going to carry us forward to effectively counter climate change. I've put some of the questions that have already been named that were in the event blurb, but I just want to remind us here what we're covering. This is missing the fourth bullet point that we'll get to in terms of the role of arts and culture. But in terms of what I'll talk to just very briefly with all of you is this: what are the dominant narratives? What are the main challenges with those narratives? And how do we, given that, how do we foster greater engagement of people and a sense of actorness? So the media for the longest time covered climate as a confusing, complex topic, and they often provided this idea of false balance. I've worked in this space for a long time, so I've seen it change over time. But initially, some of the biggest media outlets would have a scientist, a climate scientist, and then a climate denier and a climate skeptic. And it was this idea that the verdict is still out. Thankfully, that is no longer. Most major media outlets are covering climate, mindful that 97, 98% of the scientific community recognizes, I think someone's still off mute if you want to mute your line, but 97, 98% of the climate community recognizes that climate change is happening, that we have to do something about it, that's anthropomorphic, we caused it, it's human caused, and we need to tackle it quickly. But this confusion early on, exacerbated and propagated by the media community too, and then the doubters and deniers in the space, caused a real headache in terms of winning the hearts and minds, engaging the public, and getting them on board this work. Now, I will say media is now pretty effectively globally. International media, European media, American media, Australian media, they're covering the extreme weather that's coming from climate change. So I would say, if anything now, the media is doing a great job of covering the climate impact, so much so that it's causing the anxiety and the disempowerment that we've talked about. So you talk to anyone who's informed, who's watching the media and mindful of how the media is covering this conversation. And I think most people, and just in fact, this morning, when I got coffee in Vermont, where I'm at, the barista was talking about the warming climate here in Vermont because it's raining, it's not snowing, should be snowing. And she has kids, and she was expressing to me very appropriately to this conversation, her anxiety and her fear for her kids who are 4 and 5 years old because of what we're seeing here. And so I'm thrilled that both institutes are hosting this conversation because we are in a special place of feeling overwhelmed and the doomsday is real. So how do we engage the public mindful of the doomsday? What I've seen in the climate community, definitely in Europe, but also in the US, is a tendency to then point fingers at the culprits. And while that is essential, I'm going to pivot very quickly to what we can do as a community, what we can do as individuals, because I think for a lot of people, it's convenient to call out the fossil fuel industry only and say, we have nothing to do here as individuals. It's not individual change, it's systems change. We have to take issue with the big polluters, and we do, to be clear. But if you look at me on social media, I will counter that either or with a both and, because I think very much, yes, we need to call out the fossil fuel culprits, either corporate or country, but we also need to debunk this false choice between individual behavior change and systems change. Again, it's both and. Because this is what we want to get to. We know that if we get individuals acting, if we get communities acting, it will change systems, it will change markets, it will change companies, it will change countries. So getting individuals acting too is essential. So I just wanted to name that because we see that in the climate space, it's systems change, it's not individual behavior change. We don't have to change our food, we don't have to change our fashion, we don't have to change our fill in the blank. Yes, we do. And yes, we need to tackle systems change too. I want to identify a reality here that's also getting in the way of this community building, this actorness, this solidarity, this empowerment. Edelman every year produces a trust barometer. And this year's trust barometer has the #1 finding that distrust is now society's default emotion. Nearly 6 in 10 say their default tendency is to distrust. Another 64% say it's now to a point where people are incapable of having constructive and civil debates on issues they disagree on. This is a huge obstacle. This is a problem. And this is global. Their trust barometer is a global assessment, global qualitative survey. So how do we build this systems change, collective change, individual change, given that distrust is at an all-time high, trust at an all-time low, at least in recent history when the data was coming about. So what I think about all the time in my work, working with cities and working with communities that support those cities, is how do we get people to make the individual change that we need them to make, the behavior change? It's not easy because there's a status quo bias. People like to stay in their lane. They don't like to change behavior, but we need them to change behavior. We need adults. Kids, it's a little bit easier, but we need adults. We need all of you. We need all of me to change behavior, again, to support that collective and systems change. What I encourage our cities to do is really appeal to basic human needs and not to feel like they still need to win the climate data fight or the climate science fight. I still see the climate community really leaning into the data and the science. And frankly, the data and the science don't win the hearts and minds, which is why it's so important that we're talking about arts and culture, because that's what often moves people to collective action. So I encourage our cities to frame their climate work through all of these basic human needs. And increasingly you're seeing that. The media is covering that too. What are the health benefits of climate policy? What are the economic benefits of climate policy? What are the security benefits of climate policy? But I want us to think in terms of, how is life going to be better for our communities? How is life going to be better for our individuals? How is life going to be better for me, for you, for our sisters and brothers and families, etc.? Because that's what's going to compel people to act, to get out of status quo bias, and to make a change. But in addition to that, because for years I've been pounding that pavement of that porous pavement, that permeable pavement for tree benefit purpose, to impress upon the public, like there are economic benefits, health benefits, security benefits, quality of life benefits, ego benefits to making a change, to driving an EV, to getting solar, to energy efficiency, to weatherization, you name it, to plant-based diets. There are all those kind of benefits. And yet, mindful of the distrust that is pervasive, how do we build community? So these next few pictures really attend and attest to how our cities are building community. This is out of Yokohama, where they partnered with Starbucks to use no electricity in the creation of Nothing is Charming. That was the name of the campaign. The idea that you can come together as a community, you don't have to use much energy, we can fellowship together, we can have fun together, we can eat together, we can talk together. And this whole idea of how do we build community, especially post-COVID, especially when mental illness is on the rise. A bunch of stories in the Washington Post yesterday about mental illness in our schools in the United States. How do we build community right now to counter that anxiety, to counter that stress, counter that doomsday scenario? This is out of Fort Collins, which is a city in Colorado that's a partner with Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is my sister organization. They're creating this incredible campaign that I helped build called the Shift Campaign. You can see here how they're encouraging individual behavior change. But the whole purpose is to build a community in Fort Collins of people taking action. There's a movement, there's momentum. People want to be a part of something. And especially given that COVID isolated us, how do we bring people back together? Digital is going to be really helpful in that, but increasingly face-to-face again. How do we build community, reflect back the action that people are taking so that people feel like they're part of something? This is out of Amsterdam, created in response to the energy crisis heading into the winter due to the war in Ukraine. This was a small short-term goal of reducing structural gas by 15%. They built this whole action network. They've already reduced 11%. They're on their way to 15 by the end of the year. And talking with the team here in Amsterdam, they've really built this community across public and private sectors. But again, thinking about what compels community to come together. Short-term goal, actionable, doable, accessible, whole of society, everyone's involved. There's a platform to reflect back the incredible action that's happening. Amsterdam also launched this site years ago. So this is separate from the gas campaign that I just mentioned. They launched this site to reflect back all the incredible citizen action happening across the city. And you can search and you can add, and you can say, hey, I'm doing this, and you can find out what your neighbor is doing. This work is so important, building community, building collective actions so that people don't feel alone in their individual behavior change. A couple more slides. This is out of Helsinki. They've created this whole digital community to help people go green, make it easy, make it fun. But again, this is so important to counter that anxiety, to counter that doomsday reality. Building community out of Sydney here, this race to the greenest building, this Better Buildings Cup in Sydney. They created this whole leaderboard to show what people are doing, and mindful of social norming, that you're more likely to take action if you know your neighbors are taking action. So again, building community, reflecting back the incredible action that's happening. One or two more slides. This is out of Cleveland, Ohio. Every year, they bring together the whole of community. And what you see here is a cross-section of society. It's museums, it's parks, it's hospitals, it's educational institutions, it's community-based organizations coming together to co-create the city's sustainability strategy. And over several days, they have a lot of Post-it notes, a lot of sheets, and they're mapping out and designing the city's sustainable future together. The city has shared power with the community, and increasingly our cities are moving in this direction, sharing power and shifting power to communities so that we're co-creating that future together. Lastly, last slide, resilience hubs. You may have heard of them. They're popping up. Guardian just wrote a piece on it. We're doing this, we're rolling out this in the United States. Resilience hubs in the face of extreme weather. Important for all the things you see here. You can see it, sustainable energy source, charging station, access to water, community garden, reliable communication, emergency preparedness plan. But at the core of this, I don't know if you can see it at the bottom, there's a heart that says community program. increasingly, these places are being used not only for all the emergency reasons, but also to build community, to build social capital, to build social cohesion. So people are coming, they're hanging out, they're playing games, they're watching TV together, they're having fun together, they're knitting together, they're quilting together. And that work cannot be forgotten in our climate response and our climate policy, because people are so hungry for that. The high distrust, the low trust, people want to build community. So ensuring that we're creating these spaces across our planning and programming to bring people together so they can have fun together, build partnership together, again, especially post-COVID. So that's my input. I'll stop sharing now. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you so much, Michael. That was fascinating to see the emphasis on positive examples of convincing people that life will be better if we take these changes. It's not all doom and gloom. I'd like to turn it over now to Katharina van Bronswijk and get her take on this. Katharina, the floor is yours now for the next 7 minutes.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for organizing this amazing event. So I'm, as a psychologist, just going to briefly explain the reaction to climate change that we as humans show. So we have our planet and it's on fire. And then there's the scientists who are raising the alarm and saying something's going wrong here. That's the first step of climate communication. And I think that is where the first barrier arises, because actually our brain as humans isn't made for complex and complicated problems like climate change. So it's really hard to process all that information because it's highly complex and abstract, and it's hard to kind of wrap your head around it. And that's why these information kind of fall on the soil of our ideologies. So depending on our worldview, we would interpret these informations and then react in different ways. And that would either be, I don't care, for those who share a certain worldview that kind of doesn't include nature as a value in itself, or mostly right-winged or authoritarian worldviews that kind of are threatened by this evidence, and that leads to basically denial and just sticking to the behavior that people had before. And then on the other hand, and that's actually the main part of our societies, there's people who are overwhelmed by that information and then react with different emotional reactions to the different aspects of climate change. There are aspects of danger, which then leads to an emotional reaction of anxiety, fear, which is a natural reaction. It's not, if you talk about climate change and climate anxiety, it kind of sounds like that's a diagnosis and that people are sick because of climate change, because of these emotions that they are experiencing. But I just want to highlight very clearly that emotions are not a mental illness. We all have them, and it's normal to have them. It's actually good that we have them. It's an evolutionary advantage because it helps us make moral decisions and gives us the energy to act according to our needs and values. So some people are afraid, and then there's aspects of injustice that can lead to anger. So there's eco-anger as well. And then we have many, many aspects of loss, which will lead to suffering, grievances, and there's whole new words around climate grief. One of them is solastalgia, which basically describes the nostalgia for a place of solace. So kind of losing your home. It's like a homesickness because, for example, if you take a walk in the forest of your childhood and you see all the trees are dying, then that place of solace that you normally had kind of changes, and it doesn't give you all the solace it had before. And that grievance is called solastalgia. So we have all these very different climate emotions. There are more. There's guilt and there's shame, and there's a lot of emotions in them. And then the question is, what do I do about it? And that's another problem with climate communication, because we mostly leave people with these feelings, and we don't tell them how to channel these emotions into action. And that's another task that I have for climate media or organizations, because we need to tell people what they can do, what direction to channel these emotions towards. And that could be action in the best case. So doing something on the individual level and on the collective level for changing the society and making that transformation reality that we all need. The other thing, if there's other communicators who basically creating narratives around you don't really need to act, it's not that bad, or maybe it's already too late, that can lead to different reactions. So then people wouldn't get active because parts of our society have already resignated. They're lost in resignation because they feel overwhelmed and they don't see their opportunities to act because nobody told them. And then the only way to get out of these feelings is to basically deny your own responsibility or the severeness of climate change once you accept that it does exist. So there's different other levels of denial that we have. And resignation basically also is a way of escaping these bad emotions because you get to a less harmful state of accepting that things are bad, but it's not your responsibility to do anything about it. And then there's a huge chunk of our society that basically knows that there's a problem and they haven't resignated yet, but they don't know what to do. And that's why they stay inactive. And then there's those who are kind of denying the bad effects of climate change, who are telling stories about vineyards in Hamburg and how climate change is going to change everything to the better. That's a very special form of denial as well. And that basically leads to them not being active, not trying to see the effects of climate change, not listening to organizations who are trying to activate them, and not talking about climate change as well. And that basically leads to sticking to the behaviors we already have. So there's a few gaps that we need to bridge with good climate communication, and now it's going to be less fun, but more scientific. I think this is a really important model from the environmental psychology that kind of explains one of these gaps that we underestimated highly in the environmental movement within the last few years. It's a German one. It's from the 80s, so we should have known a long time ago that there is no direct link between environmental knowledge and our pro-environmental behavior. They have to be the according values and the attitudes towards the environment that make that information meaningful in some way. So if I don't care about the Amazon burning, I won't change my behavior. But if I love trees, if I love forests, if I love nature, then that is of importance to me. So we really need to change values and attitudes towards nature by educating people. So it is an information of significance to them when the environment is damaged and changed. That's the first thing. And the other three are around possibilities to act and incentivizing these possibilities to act. So kind of creating the opportunities for behavior and also building these structures that allow for behavior change. And that is something that Michael just presented very nicely. So we need to give people opportunities to do something, to be heard, to empower them, and create a political and also societal system that allows them to change their behavior. If there is no bike lane, I cannot ride my bike. That's basically it. And we need to give people opportunities to act that are not just promising to do something, but that really have an effect. So that's the outcome expectancies, the perceived consequences of behavior. If you tell people, if you sign this petition, the world's going to be saved, we are going to disappoint them because it's not true. So we need to give them real opportunities with a big leverage. And that's something that we haven't adequately communicated or not created for people to have. And now I'm going to highlight some more of the shift in narratives. And I think it really matches well with what Michael just talked about. So Schlichting in her study identified three consecutive phases of changing narratives around climate change. So around in the early or mid 1990s, the US fossil fuel industry and coal industry pushed the frame of scientific uncertainty to delay change. And that worked quite well. It did work well with the tobacco industry, and it worked well for the fossil industry as well. And then around 1995, the Kyoto negotiations, the strategy shifted, at least in the US and Australia to the socioeconomic consequences of emission reduction. So basically saying, yes, it would be important to do something, but it's going to ruin our economy. So we can't do it. And around the same time in Europe, and I think we're changing to that in the US now as well, is basically telling stories about how the industry is going to save us all by being the leaders in climate protection. And the question is, are they really? And I mean, of course, we all are society, we all are politics, we all are in a democracy, we all are the economy, because we're part of these systems. So we will need the industry to change, but I think that narrowing it down to they are going to be the one who's saving us, that's wrong. So we all need to do our part. And then in the public discussion, it's not denying climate change, but we have some delay discourses that kind of allow us to delay the change, the transformation by discussing more. And these can be narrowed down to 4 overarching categories. One is to redirect the responsibility, and that's something that at least in Germany happens quite often, this whataboutism, saying, yes, of course, we need to do something about climate change, but what about the kids who are protesting? They're using smartphones, so they shouldn't be protesting because they are not perfect. So let's talk about smartphone usage and young people. So we're just, hopping between different topics and not really discussing climate change and transformation, or that we're always pointing our fingers at individuals and not talking about system change as much as we should. And then we have this pushing non-transformative solutions, very widely used in Germany, the technological optimism, basically saying, we don't have to change because one day the engineers are going to find a magic Hoover that can suck out all the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then it's all going to be fine. And if you ask the engineers, no, they won't, at least not in the time frame that we have. So it's not true. Or trying to say, okay, we need rich technologies like fossil fuels. We need to use gas instead of oil or coal. Talking a lot, not doing much is something we really like to do as well. That goes with one of the other emphasizing the downsides, the perfectionism, policy perfectionism, kind of trying to first find the perfect solution and taking years to develop it without starting to act. And I think with the time frame that we have, we need to start acting while we are developing the plans right now. Also appealing to social justice. So talking about the poor people of our society that cannot afford the transformation. It's something we really like to do, especially conservative politicians who never really care about poor people unless it's useful for them to stop any policy arising that they don't like. So of course we need to draft societal change in a way that doesn't break our society apart. We always need to do environmental laws together with social laws to cover these discrepancies and to help marginalized communities to cope with the change, but it shouldn't stop us from acting at all. And then there's the last part, which is surrendering, kind of saying it's already too late, so we don't need to do anything. We just have to adjust to the changes that are going to be arising, and we don't have to mitigate anymore. So that's all discourses on a societal level, but maybe also in a one-on-one conversation. And if we know about these delay discourses, it helps us to understand that maybe at this point, there's a psychological defense. And it's not about the topic. It basically is a hint that there are uneasy emotions in the background that we need to tend to, because if we don't, then the defense won't go down. So that's far from me, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Katharina. We definitely want to dive into those issues in the group panel rounds. For now, though, I'm going to turn it over to Ayat from the cultural sector and hear from an artist perspective what we should be doing. Thanks so much.
You're still muted.
Yeah, I'm not sure we hear you there. Still not hearing you there.
Is it working?
Maybe
very good.
That's better. There we go.
It's working? Very good.
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. So sorry, I was saying my name is Ayat Najafi. I'm a film and theater director from Tehran. I'm based in Berlin. I'm also a multimedia artist. And here in this presentation, I'm going to talk about an art project we had over several years, Sun, Snow, and then there was dust. But before I go there, I want to thank you for inviting me. I think I lost the track already because of this mute problem. It's an honor to be part of this panel, and these are very special days in Tehran. So I'm happy to be here on this panel on the topic totally unrelated to what's going on. However, right now, if you talk to people in Tehran or in Iran in general about the problem of climate change and water bankruptcy and all these difficulties we have, people probably say, oh, forget about it, we have bigger problems. And that's exactly what our project was about. In Sandstorm and Then There Was Dust, we wanted to raise awareness. We wanted to bring artists together from Iran, Turkey, Iraq, and in the beginning, Syria, which we couldn't, of course, due to the civil war there, to work on the former region of Mesopotamia, which used to be, or they call it, it was a very rich culture, rich history, rich, let's say, when we also talk about the water, we had lots of water resources. And now the Euphrates and Tigris are basically drying out, the big dams building up in Turkey, basically destroyed the entire rivers. The wars, the ongoing civil wars, digging for more oil. And then it goes also to what Michael said, like the denial of the people, like they don't really care to change their lifestyles. So that was where we started this project. I'm going to introduce one of the projects we had in this exhibition, Al-Mashuf, which was done by the collective Tehran Platform. Tehran Platform is basically three architects from Tehran, but they're also media artists, and they really try to raise and use the media to address the climate change and environmental catastrophe that we have in Iran. They started a project, Velograph. It's Velograph is a technique that you can really see where the water is lost. So you go through, you go around the lakes that they are disappearing, which we have a lot of them in Iran at the moment, and they found out where are the illegal wells or the wells around those lakes. So we can continue. So here we have the entire the map of the water sources of Iran. And if you continue, you see some red points. Yes, so these are the most troubled lakes of Iran that Tehran Platform started to analyze and to see how they lost their water. Can you please continue? So we start from the Urmia Lake, which was the biggest lake inside Iran, and now it's almost died. Can you continue, please? Yes, here in this video, you can see what happened to this lake in the last 30-something years. Yes, so from here I'm going to be fast, so you can really go through the photos and then to the pages, and I say stop. So there are other lakes that they are all disappearing, and these are really different reasons. From the mismanagement of the water, from the governments that they don't have any policy or any interest of saving the water resources, and also to the illegal wells that the people, the society basically make. Please continue. I have to be very fast from now on to come to the main project. You can pass it, please. Yes. Can continue, please, to the next pages. Yes, so we come to this project Al-Mashuf that we produced for the exhibition Sandstorm and It Was Dust. Al-Mashuf is the name of a boat which was used by the people in the marshes of Hurul Azim. It's a marshes which is located on the border of Iran and Iraq, and it has a very long history. Over 5,000 years, people lived on these boats on the wetland. Can continue. We have some old photos of the Hur. So you can see how it used to look like, the lifestyle of these people. They didn't care if it's Iran or Iraq. They had their lives, on their boats. You see their houses, you see the buffaloes, and so on. Please continue. And this lifestyle is basically totally disappeared due to first of all, Saddam Hussein wanted to get rid of the political uprising of the Shia militia. So he basically changed the direction of the Euphrates and Tigris at the end in order to draw it out. So he basically man-made decision only to kill his opposition. And then it continued with the 2 Gulf wars we had. And of course, the big dams, the Ataturk Dam and the security dam that they are making in Turkey, it also killed the rivers from the resources from the very beginning. And then, of course, there are lots of oil projects that they also dry out part of this wetland to get more oil, Can you please continue? Yes, and continue. I tell you stop. So you see a little bit of the lifestyle of the people. What Tehran platform did was they made an Instagram account called The Memory of the Who, and they tried to gather the oral history, the memories of the people who basically experienced this lifestyle, which was going on until very recently, and to make it basically live again in a digital format, in a VR project. So with the help of the satellite pictures, with the help of that's how the Hur looks like at the moment. And you see how the buffalo is living, and you see the catastrophic situation of this wetland, which used to be the richest wetland of the entire region. Please continue. So with the help of this information they gathered from the satellite pictures, from the oral history of the people, and with this platform they designed, they started to rebuild this lifestyle inside the video, inside the VR video, that I'm going to present it at the end of my presentation. I think since I passed the time, you can already go to the video, and then we see 40 seconds of, yes. So as you see, something which used to be a live environment is already dead. And as an artist, what else I can do, to collect people, to collaborate with the artists from different parts of the world, and to raise this awareness, which is a global catastrophe. And if we don't stop it right now, soon we have the war for water in each village of Iran, you know? So we tried, with the help of this project, with the help of other projects we had in this exhibition, to raise awareness and try to push the politician to find the right solution. Thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you so much, Ayat. It was a beautiful project and some great visuals for us to enjoy. Appreciate it all. So we're going to begin now our roundtable section, but in the interest of time and giving everybody a fair chance at asking questions, I'm going to kick things off with a few questions of my own, and we'll then move into the Q&A. But if you already have a question or comment for the panelists based on their talks, go ahead and put that in the chat already. Also, make sure you write for whom the question is, and I'll field them when we get to that point. As I mentioned, we'll also be putting out a call for hands up later if you want to ask the question directly yourself. But first, I just want to follow up on your presentation and ask more about your projects. They've looked at the positioning of these different groups and governments in conflict over environmental resources. Do you think that cultural actors have a responsibility to incentivize people to take action to prevent this kind of conflict?
And absolutely. I mean, as I said, when you walk around the city, no one really takes it seriously. That was our first impression when we started this project in 2016. And it wasn't only in Iran, we were in Turkey. I haven't been in Iraq, but I was talking to many artists and also people from the civil society. People know that there is a problem, but they don't believe, as Katharina said, that they can do something, you know. Like in Iran, people say, oh, we wait for revolution and then we're gonna have a good government and they're gonna take care of it. No, I mean, of course, I mean, we are losing the water already, you know, so, and no future democratic state in Iran can save the water if we don't act as civil society, as Michael said, you know, to start the small communities. And I'm aware of the power I have. It's nothing, you know, we know that what we are doing, what we are producing is basically nothing, but this nothing, if gathered with other nothings, we can build something out of it.
Yeah, and you're pointing to something that both Michael and Katharina have pointed out to as well, which is this false choice between individual and system change. And how do you encourage people to sustain individual change when they have this feeling of powerlessness? Katharina, in your work, can you tell us what the roles of fear, of grief, and anger are that stand in the way of people taking action? And what would you tell people how to combat those?
Well, in a nutshell, I would say that the best way of dealing with emotions is to let them come and let them be. So basically feeling what you feel. And that is an experience of a wave. So these emotions come, they stay for a while, and then they go again without you doing anything. And then you can listen to what these emotions are trying to tell you. So what needs, what values are standing behind these emotions and how to act on them. So for example, if you are feeling sad, then the question is, what loss are you grieving? And how could you protect these things that are of importance to you in the future? So our love for nature and the grief that we experience when it changes can motivate us to protect nature. And we have to harvest that energy within these emotions because they actually give us the energy to act. And I think we live in a bit of an emotion-phobic society. So we're not used to talking about our emotions, and we're not used to experiencing uneasy emotions because we have that societal promise of ever lasting happiness. And that's just not true. It's not human nature to be happy all the time. So basically accepting what is there and then acting on it is what we need to do, and kind of finding a balance between avoiding these emotions and on the other hand panicking, because panicking won't help either.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that as well, because you see emotions even as a positive motivating force, but is it also sensible to try and prevent these reactions in the first place?
I think it's not realistic. So if we really deal with the size of the problems that we are facing, then it's hard not to feel anything about it. And then I think it's easier to try and learn to live with it and accept it and turn it into something helpful.
Yeah. And Michael, what do you think? We've talked about this false choice between individual and system change. Do you think that that is something that the news media is doing enough to encourage people that they need to take personal responsibility?
Well, unfortunately, there was a lot of targeting at individuals, and some fossil fuel industries and companies were behind that. You know, you're at fault, you're to blame, and it was a convenient distraction for the fossil fuel companies and industries to put it on individuals. And so understandably, the climate community came out in force and protected all of us and said, hold on, you don't need to feel guilty. And certainly shame and guilt is not useful, especially if it kind of paralyzes emotion and mind and action. And so again, it's both and finding these opportunities for individual behavior change. And really, as I stressed in my presentation and also that we're hearing throughout today's conversation, building community so that we're not alone, because the worst possible thing is to feel like you're alone in this effort. And so how do we build community? We're taking action together. It's fun, life is better. And, you know, not to negate, because I really appreciate Katharina's point about all the emotions are important, they're natural, and let's be present with them. So I'm so thankful we're creating space for this conversation too. If you look at my social media channels, just quickly, Twitter is for my anger, Instagram is for my love of nature, LinkedIn is for solutions. And so every day I post a new solution in the sustainability space in LinkedIn. And it's really interesting to see what gets traction. Now, my anger on Twitter is what I do for catharsis. And I write a lot of op-eds to like get my frustration out. That's how I'm processing it. But my Instagram is my love of nature. And so I find different ways to channel and harness and harvest, as Katharina mentioned, my own emotions, because I find it's necessary. But I will say in the LinkedIn space, people are really responding to the positive solutions because I think they're so hungry for them. They need it. And so be mindful of that too.
Maybe I can add something.
Please do. Yeah, Katharina, what do you make of that?
On that discussion on individual versus collective change, because changing individual behavior doesn't only change your own behavior, but it changes social norms as well, because other people see your behavior change, and that changes the perception of there's nothing that can be done and there are no solutions available, because you are a role model for other people who are looking for opportunities to change their behavior. So all these things we can do, they're a bit of an interlink between the individual and the societal level. And one thing I really want to emphasize, and I always do, is that we're not just individuals, we are collective beings as well. We are parts of groups, we are parts of society, and we are in the democracy part of the sovereign body of a country. It's, at least in Germany, it's part of the constitution that it says that we are the sovereign of this country, and it is our responsibility to do politics. It's different in different societies because we have different political systems, but in the end, we're all political beings, and we need to not just think about our individual level, but also about the societal parts of us and how these can be changed. German Watch uses the term of a handprint that can be maximized. Instead of just lowering your carbon footprint, they say with your handprint, that's the societal transformative part of your behavior where you can change systems.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. We have questions coming in already, so I think I'm going to already turn to what the audience wants to hear. If anybody else wants to put their hand up or write something in the comments section, please go ahead and do that. We have a hand up from Birgitta Huse, I believe. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question to our panelists, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, hello. Well, thank you, first of all, very much for this very interesting panel. Really inspiring, a lot of things I knew, but also new inspiration. That's very good. Thank you very much for that. And then I've got a question to Ayat. Maybe I missed that, but I would like to know more about the reaction people gave or comments they gave on this art project. So, I mean, it's very interesting to raise attention, but what did people comment, or did they get active? What did they do? Did they meet? Did they discuss about it? So I would like to know more about that aspect, please.
Yes, so we had the exhibition so far in Turkey and in Germany. And yes, we got very active audience. So that was amazing. We also had some interactive performances and talks and workshops. And the reason I came to Iran is because we wanted to have the exhibition in Iran as well. And I think it's very important. And we also like to travel in Iran with the exhibition. So that was basically the idea, to raise this knowledge in Iran as well, and to activate part of the society we can reach. Of course, we cannot reach a lot. The problem is something else happened in Iran, and now we are in totally age of, so there is no possibility to have exhibition at the moment. People don't want to talk about climate change. And it's very unfortunate, because for me, they're all interconnected. They are the environmental catastrophe and the climate change is part of this ongoing movement in Iran, But at the moment, the focus is somewhere else. So I have to be patient. And probably we can have the exhibition next year, and then I can answer you the year after. How was the reaction here? So I give it to future.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I would actually pose a follow-up question to all of our panelists based on it, which is, given that this is a truly global problem and global phenomenon, do you think there's something unique about the role of cultural actors in being able to cross borders and affect change? We'll start back with Ayat, since you just finished, and then go to Michael and Katharina.
Can you again repeat the question? I just lost for a second.
Sure. Whether there is a unique role and responsibility for cultural actors, for artists, for film directors, for people like yourself, to bridge these cross-border divides in trying to affect change and make people take individual responsibility for climate change.
Absolutely. I mean, I have to start from myself. Before this project, I myself had a very, very few information on this topic, So the fact that we have to change ourselves, it started from myself by this project. And then we really chose some borders, like Iran, like the project I just presented was in Iran-Iraq border. We had a project on Syrian and Turkish border, Iraq and Turkey border. Because, I mean, the climate change doesn't know the borders, The politicians know, but the climate change doesn't. And the people across the borders, they suffer from the same, phenomenon. So I think what we did in this project and was very helpful was also to connect artists from Iran, Iraq, and Turkey together. And also we invited some scientists from Germany to join us. So this was really a cross-border communication, interaction, and also production. And I can say for this a small project we had, and I say small in compare with this huge problem we have in the global stage, we reach a lot. We reach a lot, and still we can reach more. So it motivates me to continue, and it motivates me to be more proactive,
Thanks very much. And Michael, your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll answer your question and also attend to Anya's question in chat. So is there a role for artists especially across borders? I can't speak highly enough and supportively enough of the role of arts, which I put in chat some previous work I had done. I feel frustrated daily working in the nonprofit space, which relies heavily on data and planning and PDFs. And I long for my previous days as an artist, simply because I'm mindful of human nature and how we love story. And, if we went out to the street and interviewed people in terms of, tell us a moment when you changed your mind, or changed a behavior, or changed your thought, or changed the way you saw the world, they might likely point to an experience or a book or a film or an art piece or an art exhibit or theater, dance, whatever. Likely it was something in nature, something experiential, something artistic. It probably wasn't a data point, though it might have been complemented by a data point. So to Anya's question, yes, science is essential. And we do need that role. If you look at TED Talks and what makes for an effective TED Talk, and I put Katharina's TED Talk in the chat. Hopefully that was okay, Katharina, because it's a great TED Talk and I hope people watch it. But someone did an analysis of an effective TED Talk, and roughly 65% of that TED Talk is pathos, it's story, it's creativity, it's emotion. Yes, we need logos and ethos, harkening back to Aristotle here. So yes, we need facts. Yes, we need to be credible in the telling of those facts in the science. So we do need the scientific community, we do need the science, we do need the data, but those are smaller percentages. Those are like 25, 15% in terms of the role they play in an effective story, in an effective talk, in an effective pitch, communication. So I mentioned the 65%, it doesn't matter really the percentages, but the point is that the majority of the influence comes from pathos, comes from story, and that's where the arts are so important. And it needs to be complemented by good data, by credible people. So they play a role too. I just think in the climate space, historically, we really leaned into the ethos and logos. We really leaned into the data and the scientific community to win the hearts and minds. And I think we're realizing slowly but surely that didn't do the trick. Now we need to better balance it and bring in story, bring in arts, bring in creativity, etc.
Thanks, Michael. And Katharina, I'll ask you two questions then. The one first about the role of cultural actors, and also to touch on Anya from Scientists for Future Germany's question about communication not being about making the scientific point anymore. She says she partly agrees with that. And you know, their past experience as scientists are worried actually unlocked action without putting the burden on people to come up with their own opinions. They could just look at scientists and their facts and sense of urgency. So let me know what you think also from your experience in your practice.
Well, I would totally agree with Michael. For me, it was a movie that actually sparked my action. Right before the COP in Copenhagen, I watched The Age of Stupid, which kind of created that emotional state that I was in when I was taken aboard with Greenpeace right after that presentation. And I think without the emotional spark, I wouldn't have joined. So I think it needs us all. It needs the arts, it needs the science, it needs all of us, as you said, Michael, to get it done. And we all have a different role. So from the research that I know, which is also science, but psychological science, we do need science because we've seen the lowering trust in society, but people who actually still gain a lot of trust in society are actually scientists and health workers, so doctors, psychologists, care workers. So there are parts of society that are still highly trusted, and scientists are one of them. So we still need the science. We also need the social sciences, I would say. And we need the arts, because I think better than anything else, experiencing a story or a piece of art opens up a space for experiencing these emotions and processing them, not just within yourself, but also as a collective, because you're experiencing it together with the others who see the picture or the exhibition, or those who are in theater with you. So it really opens you up to a shared experience, and getting out of that solitude and experiencing your own despair, and kind of opens up for a collective processing of this state that we are in. So I really, really would recommend having the arts on board and the social sciences as well.
Absolutely. And you illustrated that beautifully in your presentation with the fun flow charts and the more technical ones. We have a question from Yannick that I'll also put to you, Katharina, while I have you there, but I think it is indeed addressed to you, but I think it might also be interesting for everybody to comment on. Yannick asks how to counter the narrative that climate activists are actually advocating for abstinence, the German Verzichtsdiskurse, and thus they are hypocritical when they use something like a smartphone, even as they are, asking for better environmental policies. So what do you think are some elements of an actual believable positive vision of the future?
Well, I think first of all, it is important that we have a positive vision of a future, or envision a way to go, because mostly we're talking about what we want to avoid. And in psychological research, we know that we don't just need avoidance goals, but also goals to work towards. Otherwise, it's like getting in a taxi and saying, don't drive me to the train station. It's like, where do we want to go? We need to think about this visible future. And now I forgot the question. Sorry, I just have to scroll up and read it all again.
Yeah, the question just how do we counter this narrative of hypocrisy around climate activists who are able to call for change on the one hand, but use smartphones on the other?
Well, I would say basically just naming it as it is, saying that's a way of avoiding the conversation that we really need to have. That helps most of the times.
Yeah.
And of course, for those who are active, I would say it's advisable to be honest. We're not holy people. We have our faults as well. And we live in this system with the barriers it creates to living sustainably. You can't live carbon neutral in Germany or in the US at the moment. It's not possible. So I'm not carbon neutral, and I can say that. And that basically gives me back credibility when I talk with people. I say, I'm not perfect. I don't ask you to be perfect. We just need to talk about the change that we need.
And Michael, you agree with that, saying we're not holy people at the risk of opening yourself up for criticism?
So I just want to second what Katharina said. It was well stated. I was writing in chat and then she named it. I'll just add, because I try to walk the talk as much as I can, but I'm definitely not perfect. I think it's really helpful to name that, as Katharina noted, because it invites people into a conversation. We're all on a path. We're all on a journey. I do think it's important to have conversations about it. Let's talk about it. Let's not avoid it, but just recognizing, hey, I'm trying to do the best I can. I'm trying to walk the talk in my lifestyle and my behavior, and I recognize where I'm falling short too. That's a much better invitation than like, hey, I'm a vegan and I need you to be a vegan too. Like the perfection absolutism isn't an invitation, but recognizing our faults is. So second to what Katharina said.
And Ayat, I'm curious about the Iranian example specifically. What do you think some elements of a positive and believable vision of a future are for Iran that an Iranian public would find credible?
So before I say that, I want to say I am the holy one here. So don't doubt that.
No, at least there's one among us.
Yes, I mean, Iran is a holy changes. No, I think it's very important what everyone said. And as I said, for myself, it was a learning process, and I tried to be very honest, as we call it in cinema, eye level, with the public of the exhibition. And also during the creation of these artworks, because they were all long-term ecological artworks. So we were working with the civil society, with scientists, ecologists, and so on and so forth. We all try to have this exchange and learn from each other, like in this panel that I'm already learning a lot. So that was basically the entire process. And that was the moment we also felt the need to have these kind of conversations more and more. For example, a few years ago, they started to make some nation schools to raise children with, like in all around the world, you have them. And they were very successful. They were very successful all around the country, but then the government decided to stop them. God knows why. So probably there were Western propaganda or this kind of stuff that they say. So unfortunately, those schools are not existing anymore. They don't exist anymore. But then when you go in the mountains in Tehran, you see teachers bringing children and try to make them environmental. They try to bring the awareness to the children. And we had another project that I also wanted originally to present here, but I didn't have enough time, was the Green Corners, in which we really try to connect different schools all around the country in order to produce a to raise the problem of the air pollution in the schools with the children. And that was the project by Negar Farajiani, an Iranian artist. And we realized that the Iranian educational system is really lack of any environmental awareness. So we really had to fight to bring some lessons into the schools, or at least we do it ourselves. So like what I'm saying here is, yes, we need more and more, and the society needs more information. And when we start to talk to them, they understand that the problem is huge. They just don't see it because they have more problem. They like to be addressing the economical issues, political issues, cultural issues, and they want to push the environmental issues, back. And that is really, as I said, dangerous at the moment in the country.
Thank you so much. Just a reminder, we are taking questions from the audience. If you want to put your hand up or put a question or comment into the chat. We have one up from Lebogang Mokona, a freelance journalist. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question, you are most welcome.
Hi, thank you. My name is Lebogang Mokona, and yes, like you said, I'm a freelance journalist. I'm from Johannesburg, South Africa. Thanks a lot for very great conversations. I'm actually doing research on climate change visualization, so I found like a couple of points from Michael, particularly very interesting. I have a lot of thoughts, but I'll just cut it short. Because I do also have opinions about actually the narrative as far as journalism is concerned. I don't want to be a pessimist, but I don't think journalism is doing quite too well right now. And one of the examples is the photos that I saw that you used, in your presentation, Michael, burning forests. I mean, those are very iconic images that are also used journalistically, and they are very problematic to a large extent. I mean, your presentation was beautiful. That's off topic, but they do actually, shape how people conceptualize climate change and how they understand that, marginalizing other voices. But I also wanted to generally ask about, I kind of feel like all the time that I, attend events where we talk about climate and media, climate change, it's so westernized. It's so a Western concept. And it almost sort of puts me off from where I come from. But I just wanted to ask, in terms of, there's a need for individual change, which is generally true, but perhaps we need to start deconstructing that term. Who's the individual? Because if I come from South Africa, I do know that people are doing their best, but we have so much socioeconomic problems, to try and do something for climate change. I do understand that people are very conscious of what is happening, but there are a lot of problems. And so we probably need to start looking at who is the individual, especially if we're speaking from a position of Germany. I'm currently in Berlin as part of the German Chancellor Fellowship. So I think we need to construct that, because it comes into the term of actorness, which is also another term that I saw on your presentation, Michael, because it kind of draws in this idea of passiveness and activeness. Who's active, who's doing what, who's not doing what. And so I think it's very important to start at that basic level. I'm mentioning the term actorness as something we also need to look into, because I can attest that the media tends to portray people from the global south as passive, and that almost suggests that people do not know about climate change, they're not acting, they're not doing anything. Whereas if you look at images of coverage, particularly for 2021 summer floods in Germany, people tend to be portrayed as actors, so they know what they're doing. I think we need to change this narrative, because there's really a lot of things that are being done in the global south, particularly on the African continent.
Thank you so much for that input. I just want to point out, I think that's really important points you raise, and also point out that I think you might be interested in our panel tomorrow as well, at the same time, different link, but we are going to be looking more in depth at specifically the connection between climate justice and decolonization and who is an actor, and some of those issues. So we'd love for you to join us there. Also, the point you've raised about the role of, for example, in South Africa, that was also one of the questions we have in the chat, is how can we realistically talk about behavior inspiring other people when there are bigger issues on people's minds, things like unemployment, economic issues that are at the forefront. I want to come to that second point to our panel and relay that question to all of you in just a moment. But first, I think it's only fair if Michael wants to respond to some of the questions around the imagery, since we're talking today about communication and those kind of pictures that do appear in news reports and next to text articles. And I'll hand the floor over to you first to see your thoughts, and then we can come back to the second point.
I mean, so many really important points were raised. I would love, and yes, tomorrow's panel will be an important part of this conversation too, because I would love to, and hopefully we can continue in conversation post-panel, because a lot of what you raised is a perpetual problem in terms of how these issues are being story told, who's doing the storytelling, how is climate being narrated. I mean, even thinking about how long it took Loss and Damage to be funded and focused on in the COP talks is a great illustration. I mean, it's an awful illustration, but it's a perfect illustration of what's being raised here in terms of global north, global south, how the story is being told, who's telling the story, who's financing the story. And so I just want to, I won't get into all of it because I'm curious, Claire, how you'll take where you might take the conversation from that point, but to recognize all the injustices in how the story is being told, who's telling the story, who's getting featured in the story, and where much of the work is happening, and how's that work being told. One thing, just on a side note, I want to focus on in the US going forward, I think there's a lot of awareness now in the US about environmental injustice. It's quite common to see white climate leadership talking about disproportionate burdens felt by communities of color and low-income communities, but there's not a lot beyond that. Like there's a naming of the problem, but there's of course a lot of good work happening across the United States that's not being story told by the press. And how do we amplify and elevate the work that is happening in the community at the community level? And so that's something we want to start focusing on with our cities in the coming year, because of some of the injustices already named in that really good analysis. So I'll stop there because there's a lot we could dig into.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was it was a really excellent question, and I think will be an also excellent segue to probably the last issue we'll be able to dig into for today. And I want to come back to what I just previously what was asked and what's also been mentioned by Fabienne Kleinkopf in the chat, which are essentially two questions as I understand them. The first is, when we're talking about communication and reaching communities, how are we going to reach people who are unreachable, partially because they are living in completely different social and cultural spaces? And the way I understand it is the second part, how do we reach people who have so many other issues on their minds in terms of meeting daily basic needs, finding employment, dealing with corrupt government, poverty, other problems? How can our actions as individuals reach those? And is it even realistic to try and build community in places where they won't be able to tap into these higher level debates? Maybe I'll put that first to Ayat, and we can go down the row.
Yeah, the answer is very difficult. It's really, really difficult. It's, and it's really frustrating sometimes. And an example, last month I was in Isfahan talking to a farmer who's digging deeper and deeper, making deeper wells to reach the water to keep the production of his farm going on. And I was talking to him about the dangers of his actions. And he said, what else I can do? I need this land, and it's the only thing I have. So he was really angry of me of even telling him that what he's doing is illegal, it's dangerous, and so on and so forth. So I think we need the patient, and we need to, probably what Michael tried to say with storytelling, like bringing the awareness from the point of view of, art is like to convince them that it's something important, to win their hearts. But I can also say we have this problem in general in art and culture, that our audience are very limited, and only probably in Hollywood or in the big, productions, we can reach millions. In the kind of works that I produce, my audience are really limited. And a majority of those audience are the people who think like me. So this is something I know. It doesn't, discourage me to continue, of course. I just need to raise my abilities to communicate with more people. I think it's also a work I have to do on myself as an artist, and other artists like myself, they have to do just to reach more and more people. But it's a very, very important question. And I can tell you, there is no answer to that. It's very difficult, but it's something we have to do. You know, it's something we have to continue, and to win 1 people a day, probably we can reach something.
Thanks very much. And Michael, what do you think? How do we go about building community that is cohesive when we have so many fragmented communities of people with different issues at the front of their minds?
So one of my side areas of focus previous to climate policy was foreign policy, and my master's and PhD is in the conflict space, which you mentioned in the intro, Claire. And so I'm thinking constantly about social capital and social cohesion, because we know that the data, the science tell us that in locales and communities where you have low social capital, low social cohesion, low levels of trust, you have higher levels of violent conflict. This isn't surprising news. I mean, this intuitively makes sense. And so when I think of the fracturing of society around the world, I'm speaking now from my US hat, US perspective, but also Stockholm, who's behind me in this screen share, you're seeing right-wing populist movements emerge and get stronger. And so how do we as a climate community, well, I don't want to label people inappropriately, but I see myself as part of that climate community. How do we focus on social cohesion and social capital and trust? It may feel off topic for some people, but it's going to be essential in building the community to effectively tackle the work ahead. And then what gets in the way of climate work, which has already been named in chat, you know, people focusing on their basic human needs. So if our work isn't making people's lives measurably better, then there's not going to be an appetite to talk about the data and the science if people are struggling to just feed their family. And so I put in chat, because I think COVID has flagged for a lot of our cities the critical work of focusing on the socioeconomic issues that have been named in chat and named in questions here too, because that has to be a part of our work. And you saw some of our climate staff getting seconded to COVID response and handling public health response. So that's ultimately a good thing. It was brought about by tragedy, a pandemic, but this integration of city, in my case, city approach across socioeconomic and environmental issues is going to be really essential going forward. And so thankfully our cities are tacking in that direction.
Thank you, Michael. And Katharina, your response?
So I want to second what Michael just said. I think that looking at the research around resilience, we know that one of the highest resilience factors for humans is social support. So we need community to live through crises. And in that terms, I would say that anything, it doesn't need to be climate action, but anything that creates social cohesion really is a measure to improve our transformation. So even if you're like a voluntary trainer of your local soccer team, and then you're doing a social transformation because you're strengthening the cohesion that we have, and you're helping society build resilience in crisis times. So we need everyone, wherever they are, working on a positive change.
Michael writes 100% in the chat. So yeah. I think that is a nod of approval there. I was also curious, Katharina, if you don't mind me jumping in your presentation, you spoke about the flow from not just having information, but in having the correct set of values in order to make something out of that information and actually affect change. And I'm just wondering how you see this kind of value building and education taking place in building communities in this sense.
Well, there's one thing I wanted to add on the point before, because of
Sure.
the complexity that we have with the problems. The human mind doesn't really like complexity, but it helps us build resilience to cope with ambiguities if we talk about the complexity and not just tell simple stories. I know that storytelling is something that we really need to emotionalize people and to get them into action, but we shouldn't be telling the story like it is an easy one, because the transformation isn't easy. And I think that is something that we see in media, that it's always one little part of the story that's being told, and it always makes it look like it's a very easy thing. Easy to understand, easy to cope with, and it isn't. And I think we need to open up our conversation on the complexity, and also because people have a finite pool of worry, a finite pool of attention, we need to talk about the interlinks between all these different problems that we have, because we can cope with different crises with the same measures. So talking about green growth after COVID, that also creates sustainable futures with climate change and things like that. So we need to talk about solutions that are solutions for not just one, but many problems at the same time. And that helps us deal with that complexity. And now I can come to your other question. Can you maybe ask again? I'm sorry, I forgot.
Yeah, I was just curious, in the context of the conversation we were having just before, about how you go about building a values system among different kinds of communities, one that will be able to process information about the devastation of climate change in a way that does affect positive action. I think we don't really have to build different values. That actually takes generations to change value systems. But what we can is kind of adjust the communication that we have to the value set that a person already has, or to the group of society that we're addressing our communication to. Because climate change is a very complex problem, and it kind of addresses all kinds of values. So there is a reason why for everyone. We just need to find it. Okay, thank you very much. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. So I want to thank our wonderful panelists so much for this really thought-provoking conversation, and also for the great questions coming in, both in person as far as that's possible online, and also in the chat. There's a lot to read back over there, where we've had a bit of a back and forth. If you missed that, feel free to take the time. This will be uploaded on the IFA YouTube channel soon. So if you want to go back and look at something you missed the first time around, that'll be an option for you. I think our main takeaways for today, it's not going to be easy. It has to be everything, not pick and choose in terms of individual or system change. And looking at paying attention to acknowledging and even embracing these emotions of guilt and fear and overwhelming despair that come with the issue of climate change, and looking at the ever important role of art and culture in bridging divides to help us deal with those and pay attention to it. So thanks so much for sharing your expertise with us. If anyone has any comments about this panel, you can send them by email to research@IFA, that's IFA.de, or check them out on Twitter. That's the handle is IFA Cult, as in culture, CULT, extern, EXTERN. I mentioned it earlier in the panel today, but I would like to also invite everybody who's watching today to come to our second panel discussion tomorrow. It'll be at the same time, 2 p.m. Central European time, and it's going to be specifically on the connection between climate justice and decolonization, and what role cultural relations will play in these processes. Our panelists will be Dr. Anne Pettifor, who's a British economist and a specialist on the Green New Deal. We'll also have Mr. Nimo Bassi, who is a famous and veteran environmental activist from Nigeria, and Ms. Toni Naushin, a climate and degrowth activist from Bangladesh. So looking forward to some interesting discussions and perspectives tomorrow as well. So yeah, for more information, to sign up for that, you can go to the link that we're going to be putting in the chat shortly. In fact, it is already there, so check that out at your leisure. And just to say thank you once again so much to the speakers, to the audience, to the teams at IFA and the Ecologic Institute for organizing this. There's a lot to think over, and I really appreciate you all taking the time. Have a great rest of the afternoon or evening, wherever you are.